Hi everyone, welcome to another Friday Farsight. I'm your host Sheldon Picodi, and this week's topic is lab-grown meat surpassing traditional livestock. This is one of my favorites because it's a very positive one. As I hinted before, not all of the predictions will be positive, but this one is potentially a really great development if it comes about when the prediction suggests, which is around mid-century, because livestock take up about 77% of the agricultural land currently in use and contribute quite a bit to greenhouse gases, about 1/5 or a little bit less than 1/5. So it'd be a huge impact, and it's a fairly convincing prediction to my mind. And this got me thinking about what other predictions, what other developments might also have a similar impact. So I looked up grains, or asked a question of the Strategic Farsight website about when might we replace grain food sources. And it turned out maybe another decade beyond when meat is being built and being made in factories, we might get grain production in factories through precision fermentation and also some of the same cellular agricultural techniques of lab-grown meat. So that would be pretty much all agricultural land potentially could be replaced with factories. And that just opens up a whole new potential future world where we just kind of rewild the whole planet. It's predictions like these that make me think we'll have the tools to do quite a bit of good for the world by the end of the century, despite some pretty negative socio-political predictions we'll get to later. So anyway, tools will be there. There's a science fiction genre called solar punk, which I haven't read as much of as I should, but I think probably is some pretty good futurism compared to a lot of the other stuff that's written where all the cities are underwater and we have this eco-apocalypse. I think there are a lot of developments coming that could actually be pretty positive and get us into a good place. So with that, one more note on the prediction before I hand it over to our AI hosts, Biff and Betty. There's a other part of the Strategic Farsight website which judges the viability of the predictions. So I have one model predict the future, and then I have another model from another company judge the prediction. And so in this case, the judgment was somewhat cautious, I would say, a little bit skeptical that the time frame will be mid-century. It's around 2048, I think is what the prediction is, due to social inertia. So I think there's some cogency to that argument. But what the critique is saying is not so much that the prediction isn't viable, but that we're going to resist it as a civilization. So the economic and technological trends will be there, but there's a positive view and a negative view in terms of how quickly we will move in that direction as a civilization. So completely valid, and I do think there's some truth or good reason for caution in terms of what date we think this may happen. But perhaps by being aware of these trends and technologies, as a civilization, we can gradually begin to understand that the viability is there, and maybe over time we will have the willpower to make these kind of changes and overcome the traditional battle between progressive forces and conservative forces, not thinking so much politically, but just change versus the status quo. Okay, that's probably enough for me. Remember, everybody, this content is all coming from AI, so take it all with a grain of salt. Don't base your PhD thesis on it. All right, ready to hand it off to our hosts? Biff, I think you're kicking it off this week.
Thanks, Sheldon. Wow, so this one just totally blew my mind, Betty. Imagine this, a world where most of the meat we eat isn't from animals raised on farms, but grown in giant bioreactors. And we're not talking like science fiction anymore. This prediction from Strategic Farsight says it happens by 2048. Seriously, 2048. That's not that far away.
I know, Beth, right? When I first saw it, I was just as surprised as you. But then as I dug into the details from Strategic Farsight's analysis, it really started to make sense. Once the technology matures, it could be cheaper than raising livestock and better for the planet.
Well, let's get into it. What we're talking about here, it's not the invention of the lab-grown burger. We had that today. It's more about the rollout, right? The point where you bite into a burger and just assume it came from a tank.
Right. The prediction is that within about 25 years, lab-grown meat, or cellular agriculture as they call it, will surpass traditional livestock globally. This is truly one of the most profound shifts in human food production since the agricultural revolution itself. It's huge.
So as big as the dawn of civilization. It's a big claim. I want to hear more, but first, how does this all come about? Because right now, this cultured meat thing, it feels like it's still pretty niche, you know? Something a Michelin-starred chef like Dominique Crenn might whip up into a statement, but not something you'd find in your refrigerator.
Well, the article breaks down the timeline, and it's driven by several accelerating trends all converging. First, technology. Cellular agriculture has just zoomed from science fiction to commercial reality. Think about it. Singapore approved Eat Just's cultured chicken back in 2020. Then Upside Foods and Good Meat got USDA approval in 2023. These are like major regulatory breakthroughs.
Okay, but it's still incredibly expensive, right? Like astronomical.
True, right now estimates put it at $50 to $400 a pound, compared to, say, $3 to $6 for conventional chicken. But this is where the breakthroughs come in. The key technological hurdles are being addressed quicker than you might think. The biggest challenge is bioreactor scaling. We need industrial-scale bioreactors, like 10,000 to 200,000 liters. Companies like Future Meat Technologies and Mosa Meat, they're developing continuous production systems that could cut costs by 90%. It's all about economies of scale, you know?
90%? That's a game changer if they pull it off. So, like the goo they put in these reactors to feed the cells, it's also expensive, isn't it?
The growth media? Yes, it is, but they're optimizing that too. Traditional cell culture media costs hundreds of dollars per liter, but companies like Matrix Meats and Multis Biotechnology are creating animal-free alternatives that could reduce media costs by 99%. And get this, Dr. Mark Post, who created the very first lab-grown burger, he predicts that growth media will be as cheap as sugar water by 2035.
Sugar water. Wow. That's a pretty sweet deal. And what about the texture? Because, you know, people who enjoy a good steak, not to name any names, but they like some, sinews, some marbling and juice. Can you, grow fat in a lab too?
You can, Beth. Scaffolding and texture engineering are rapidly advancing. Aleph Farms, for example, uses 3D bioprinting, and Mission Barns focuses on fat cultivation systems. These innovations are specifically designed to replicate those familiar textures and marbling patterns that earlier products, well, they just couldn't quite get right.
So the tech is getting there. What about the money side of things? Research funding is one thing, but for a mass market, you've got to build this stuff on industrial scale.
Absolutely. The transition's driven fundamentally by economic inevitability. The investment flows tell a really compelling story. Cultured meat attracted over $896 million in 2021 alone. That's a 130% increase from 2020. And major backers include Cargill, Tyson Foods, Bill Gates. That kind of investment, it just screams accelerating confidence in commercial viability.
Wow, Cargill and Tyson? That's like the traditional meat industry investing in its own disruptor.
Or its own future. At some point, the market shifts. Cost projection models from multiple sources, they all converge on price parity, meaning cultured meat is as cheap as conventional meat by 2035 to 2040. McKinsey's analysis suggests cultured meat costs will drop to between $250 and $580 a pound by 2030. Boston Consulting Group is even more optimistic, predicting costs as low as $232 a pound by 2035, all through manufacturing scale effects.
But the infrastructure, Betty, I mean, think about the sheer number of ranches and slaughterhouses and meat processing plants around the world. Replacing all that with bioreactors sounds like, well, a sci-fi mega project, like building a city on the moon.
It's a staggering endeavor, Biff, you're not wrong. Replacing global meat production would require an estimated $290 billion in bioreactor infrastructure. That's the equivalent of building 4,000 large-scale production facilities. So yes, this massive capital requirement absolutely suggests the transition will be gradual. It'll start with premium markets, and specific protein categories. It won't be an overnight flip. And then there's the regulatory and political landscape, which can be a real minefield.
Oh, for sure. You've got the cattle ranchers, the farmers. They're not just going to roll over and let this new industry take over without a fight, are they?
They certainly aren't, and the article addresses that head-on. Regulatory approval is a complex patchwork, but the FDA-USDA framework established in 2023, that provides a clear pathway for approval. We've got over 150 companies now in various stages of regulatory review here in the U.S., and European approval through the European Food Safety Authority, that appears likely during the next couple of years. So that's coming. Political resistance from agricultural interests remains significant, yes, but it's increasingly isolated. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association and similar organizations, they've lobbied for restrictive labeling laws, sure, but these efforts face mounting pressure from environmental groups and, just changing public opinion. In fact, some states, like California and New York, are already incentivizing cultured meat production through tax breaks and research grants.
Huh, so some places are actually pushing for it. That's a good counterpoint. But what about globally? Is everyone on board with this lab-grown future?
Not uniformly, no. International variations will create a patchwork adoption pattern. Singapore and the Netherlands are leading in regulatory openness. Countries with strong agricultural lobbies like Brazil and Australia may resist longer. However, China's massive investment in cellular agriculture, over $300 million in government funding since 2021, suggests early adoption in the world's largest meat market. They're not messing around.
Okay, so that's how it happens. But Betty, what if it doesn't? What are the big roadblocks, the skeptics' arguments against this 2048 prediction? Because honestly, it still feels a little, ambitious.
That's a great question, Biff, and the article has an answer for those skeptical perspectives. Technical pessimists, like food scientist Dr. Ricardo San Martin, they argue that bioreactor scaling faces fundamental thermodynamic limits, which might prevent true cost parity. The thing is, these concerns, they underestimate the power of manufacturing optimization. Industries like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, they achieved similar cost reductions through scale effects. We've seen this play out before, many times.
So it's just like an engineering challenge that eventually gets solved. I guess you and we don't have the expertise to make the call, but it sounds reasonable. What about people's feelings? I mean, meat is such a cultural touchstone for so many people. It's tied to tradition, to rural life, to identity. Can you really overcome that?
That's the cultural resistance argument, and it's a strong one. Advocates point to the deep emotional and traditional connections people have to conventional farming. But here's the kicker. Historical precedent shows that food systems can transform rapidly. The shift from local to industrial agriculture, for instance, that happened within decades, driven primarily by economic advantages. So our relationship with food, it can evolve.
Right, like the whole frozen food revolution. Some guy figures out you just have to freeze things super fast in order to keep the flavor, and a couple decades later, you've got grocery stores selling nothing but frozen food.
Exactly, which is why, wait a minute, did you say nothing but frozen food?
Well, it was one chain in New York City around 1945, or at least one store, Ultima Frozen Foods, which planned to open 109 locations in a year. It didn't work out, I guess, but frozen food got business people excited. They were throwing money at the idea.
Actually, that's what the prediction about cellular agriculture counts on to some degree: continued investment. You have the infrastructure realists who note that replacing global meat production requires unprecedented capital investment and coordinated planning. And they're right, that's a huge hurdle, but the transition will likely be gradual and geographically varied. Cultured meat will capture market share through specific applications first: processed foods, restaurant chains, before achieving complete dominance. It won't be an instant flip of a switch.
Okay, so we've got the how and a case for when. Now the big one. What does this future look like? What are the implications of most of our meat coming from bioreactors?
This is the most exciting part, Beth. The strongest driver for this transition is environmental necessity. Livestock production generates 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, uses 77% of agricultural land while providing only 18% of the calories we consume, and it requires 15,000 liters of water per kilogram of beef. Cultured meat could reduce emissions by 96%, land use by 99%, and water consumption by 94%.
99% less land. So almost all of the 77% of agricultural land used for livestock? Like entire countries worth, what, given back to nature?
It will be a huge societal shift. Some of the land might be repurposed for crops, but who knows, maybe this marks something bigger, like the moment where humanity starts needing less from the biosphere.
That's hard to imagine. Humanity in the 2050s mostly just living large in our industrial enclaves and a vast wilderness in between.
Possibly, or living on the land becomes more of a lifestyle choice. This could be, like I said at the beginning, as big as the agricultural revolution itself. There's another strategic farsight prediction about grain crops, about, a similar industrial takeover based on precision fermentation coming a decade or so after lab-grown meat.
Wow, so I'm not exaggerating at all.
Probably not by much. It's going to be a complete reset of humanity's relationship with nature. But what gets this going in the near term is the opposite: excessive demands for agricultural land, which will intensify pressure for alternatives to livestock. The UN projects global meat demand will increase 73% by 2050, while climate change reduces the land area suitable for agriculture. Trying to expand traditional livestock would require clearing additional forest area equivalent to Brazil, which would be,
Tough on the environment?
to say the least. And corporations are already driving demand for alternatives. Unilever, McDonald's, other major food companies have committed to net zero emissions by 2050, creating massive procurement opportunities for low-emission protein sources.
So it's a win for the planet, a win for corporate sustainability. What about us, the consumers? Will we actually eat this stuff?
Consumer acceptance follows predictable technology adoption curves. Early adopters are motivated by environmental and ethical concerns. Surveys show 40% of consumers express willingness to try cultured meat, with higher acceptance among younger demographics. Gen Z shows 65% willingness compared to 23% among baby boomers. But here's the really crucial bit: taste parity. Blind taste tests by Eat Just and Upside Foods show that 80 to 90% of consumers cannot distinguish their products from conventional meat when properly prepared. As production scales and techniques improve, this sensory equivalence will only strengthen. And price sensitivity analysis, it suggests mass adoption will begin when cultured meat reaches 120% of conventional prices, a threshold likely to be achieved by 2040. Premium positioning might actually benefit early adoption, as it has with organic foods and plant-based alternatives.
That's really compelling, Betty. So 2048, it really is like a tipping point, huh?
It's the global tipping point, yes, where cultured meat production exceeds traditional livestock. The Strategic Farsight article even lays out a timeline. From 2025 to 2030, regulatory approvals expand, premium products gain limited market presence, and costs drop to $10 to $20 per pound. Then, 2030 to 2040 sees technology maturation, cost parity, major food companies integrating cultured ingredients, and consumer acceptance reaching a mainstream threshold. Between 2040 and 2050, infrastructure scaling hits critical mass, cultured meat becomes cost advantageous, and traditional livestock transitions to niche markets. And 2050 and beyond, complete market dominance in developed markets, with global expansion to developing economies.
Wow. So this isn't just a shift. It's a full-on, revolution. And it almost seems, I guess you did your job well this week, Betty, inevitable. The convergence of so many forces, technology, economics, regulations, environmental need, and just changing consumer tastes. It's quite the picture.
It is, Beth. And while there's a 12-year confidence interval around 2048, reflecting the genuine uncertainty in predicting such a complex socio-technical transition, that 2048 central estimate represents the most probable convergence point of technological capability, economic incentives, and social necessity. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, that wraps up another mind-bending episode of Friday Farsight. Thanks for joining us as we peered into the future of food.
Thanks for listening, and remember, you can explore the full prediction article and so many more fascinating timelines yourself by visiting the Strategic Farsight website. It's a goldmine of future possibilities.
We'll see you next week for more future revelations.